Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this Unity video we're going to be talking about sprite animation inside of Unity. And the difference between animation controllers, animation override controllers, and animations themselves. So in the last video we took this rat swarm image, which is a sprite sheet, and we sliced it up into 3 separate sprites. So now we're going to be taking the 3 sprites from this rat swarm sprite sheet, and we're going to make a simple idle animation out of that. So we have a rat swarm underscore 0 game object in the scene. Whenever you drag a image into the scene, it automatically creates a game object with a transform and a sprite renderer. Now if we want it to do animation, we need to add one more component, and that is an animator. Now the animator component needs a controller in order to run, and the controller basically is where you attach all your different animations to and you link them up. You say how an animation can switch from one animation into another one. For instance, you can have walk animations and you can have idle animations, and when put into an animation controller or animator controller, you can define what the conditions are for when it switches from idle to walk, or from idling left to idling right. But here we're just going to have one single front-facing animation, and we'll talk more about idling left, walking right, and that kind of thing in the next video. So, in order to make this work, we need to have an animator controller. So, at this point, I might do something like have, instead of an art folder, I might have something like a characters folder. Because remember, for organization in your Unity project, you don't necessarily have to have all of your images in one file, because you can always search by type. So you could just search by type sprite, and therefore there's no real need to keep all of the sprites in one single art folder. So I'm going to move this rat swarm over here to the characters folder, and I'll create a subdirectory there. We'll call it rat swarm. Move the rat swarm into there, and now I guess we'll turn this game object into a prefab so that we can instantiate it anywhere later on. But what we're going to want to do here, and I'll do it on the prefab level so it automatically updates instances like this rat swarm in the test scene 1, is to add the animator controller. So in order to create an animator controller, right-click on your directory, go to Create, and then Animator Controller. So we can call this whatever I want, or whatever we want, rather, but the convention I like to go with is the name of the character, and then AC, so Rat Swarm Animator Controller. You'll notice in the inspector there's nothing to define here. It's all done in the animator component, or the animator window, sorry. So let's go to here and drag this animator controller in. Now, in order for this animator controller to work at all, we're going to need to define some animations. But just to point out how when you update a prefab that's stored in your assets folder, it updates the game objects in your scene as long as they don't have any custom values set. We can click here and you can see, hey, cool, the rat swarm AC has already been attached because this is a direct instance of that game object. By the way, to see custom values being set, that would be wherever the text is bolded. So if this was something else, like rat swarm 2 AC, where the prefab has rat swarm AC, this text would be bolded, and that's how you know. But let's open up the animator, and here you'll see a couple things. Basically an entry point and any state. So the entry point is basically where you would define what the first animation that character is going to be running is. If you create an animation, the first one you add here is automatically going to be that entry point, but you can also change them later on. And where it says any state, what this means is that from any state, if you have a transition marked off of this, you can transition into a new animation. So for instance, if you have any state and then you point to attack animation, then that means no matter what animation your character is currently running, if the conditions are met, you will move from whatever state you were in to that attack state. So it means basically no matter where you are, you can transition into a new state that is branched off of this if the conditions are met. Okay, that may be a little too much information for now, but let's go ahead and add in a new animation. And then once again, I'm doing this in the rat swarm directory because I want all of this stuff related to the rat swarm to be in this folder. So create, and then instead of animator controller, animation, and we'll call this rat swarm idle. You could also do something like add an underscore if you like that better. And I think I do like that better, so we'll do that. And now we can drag this animation into the animator. And as I mentioned, the first one dropped. The entry point automatically transitions into this first animation. And the animation that this component in the animator is going to play is rat swarm idle. It's automatically set up to do that because we dragged the animation in directly. It's going to run at 100% of its normal speed. And, well, because it's an entry point, you can't even set conditions. It's automatically going to end up here by default. But what does this rat swarm idle animation do? Clearly, if I go into the game, and let's do it with mute, the rat swarm isn't going to animate at all. It has an animation attached to it, it has an animator controller attached to it, but we haven't defined what those animations actually do yet. So in order for that to happen, we need to open up a new window. So it's going to be Window Animation. And while you're in this window, you should have the game object you want to modify selected. As long as that game object has the animator controller attached, and that animator controller has animations inside of it, it will give you a list of the attached animations here for you to edit. So what do we want to happen when the idle animation is going on? First off, 60 unique key spaces for keyframes a second. I think that's just an unnecessary amount for sprite animation. So I'm going to set that to 12 here, make it a little bit more clear what we're doing. And we have these 3 sprites here. So these are actually meant to be one looping animation. So it kind of goes 0, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2. So we need to do that with sprites here. Now you can add property, sprite renderer, and then come down here to sprite, add that as a property, and then you would define the keyframes, which is pretty much the normal way to do it. But a quicker way, if you specifically want to be working with sprites here, to define what sprite appears on what frame, you can just drag these sprites directly onto it, and it automatically knows in Unity that, hey, you're talking about defining which sprite is going to show at which frame. So here I can go sprite 1, sprite 2, sprite 1, and I don't need sprite 0 actually, because once it ends up here, it's going to loop back to frame 0, and we don't want 2 frames back to back where the 0th frame is showing. So if I hit play here, we can actually, well, we should be able to see that animation run. But the animator, it doesn't seem to be checked. Let's try that again. Okay, yeah. That was kind of weird. But it's playing now anyway. But you can clearly see it's way too fast. So there's a couple ways to change this. One is to reduce the amount of samples, and then obviously because 4 frames now make up 1 second, that's going to slow it down dramatically. Okay, and that animator should be checked by default. So that slows it down and brings it to a normal speed. But another way to do it, which may be a little bit more appropriate depending on your situation, would be to define how quickly it's supposed to appear in the animator window. So let's say it needs to slow down by 4 times as slow. You could set this to 0.25, and then it's going to play that animation we defined back at 1/4 of the regular speed. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's actually just hit play here. And it does play it back. But one problem we didn't take care of is that this animation isn't set to loop. So any animations you want to loop, you just go to the animation within your assets folder and you check loop time. That means that when it hits the end, it'll loop back to the beginning and it will continue, so we can hit play one more time. And yeah, there we go. Okay, a third way to control the speed of the animation would be to go back to the animator window And we still leave it at, say, 12 frames per second, but instead we space these keyframes out more. So maybe once every 3 possible slots. So this should go to 9. And then we want the animation to be basically a second total. So I'm going to add... But then one issue you'll notice is that you have 3 frames for the first portion, 3 frames for the second portion, 3 frames for the third portion. But then after basically the 9th frame here, out of 12, it stops at frame 10. You can see it grays itself out. So I'll go ahead and play this back, and you'll see the issue there. So with the rat swarm selected, I'll go ahead and play this back here. And you see the issue. When it gets to that last frame, it immediately jumps back to the start. So how you can get around that is by defining a keyframe. So I'm going to add key. And you don't actually change anything, it's still using the same sprite. But by adding that keyframe, the animation goes all the way to this 1 second mark. So we can play it back again. And you can see that it looks proper now. Now, if you do decide to switch back to that way of doing things, make sure that you increase the speed on your animation so that when we're actually running the game, it operates at that 1 second per loop speed. So I'll hit play here. And we have our rat swarm properly animating in a continuous loop, as long as that game object sticks around. So I've been Chris, thanks for watching this brief tutorial on sprite animation inside of Unity. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you guys in my future Unity content.